Welcome to the Cyber Lunchbox podcast. Hi, welcome to the Cyber Lunchbox podcast. I'm your host, Silvia Ceaușu, and today I'm chatting with Sarobidy Rakotonarivo. She's currently a research fellow at University of Antananarivo in Madagascar, and she received her PhD degree jointly from Bangor University in the UK and University of Copenhagen in Denmark. In 2021, she's one of the recipients of the Top 100 Young Conservation Leaders Awards offered by the African Wildlife Foundation and WWF, among other organizations. Welcome, Sarobidy.
Thank you. Hi, Silvia. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to join me today. So let's start talking a bit about your current research and what are the geographical areas in which you are working at the moment?
Okay, so currently I'm researching the importance of land tenure, that is people's rights to trees and to lands, on the effectiveness of reforestation in Madagascar. So you know that many tropical countries have made ambitious reforestation commitments. And this is for a triple aim. So first, it's to mitigate climate change, because we know that trees store carbon, and it's also to conserve biodiversity and improve local livelihoods. And it's been increasingly recognized that tenure rights, that is people's rights to lands and to the trees, are important enabling conditions for the success of reforestation, or sometimes it's also referred to as forest landscape restoration. But in much of Africa, tenure rights are very complex, and there is this huge disconnect between formal legal rights and what we call customary or traditional rights. So, for instance, in many African contexts, people perceive they have customary rights to the lands that they've been using for years, whereas legally, these are still defined as state lands. So, I want to know how this complex and contested tenure, which is a widespread problem in Africa and especially in Madagascar, can affect restoration investments. So, we're not only focusing on the ecological outcomes of outcomes of restoration, but also, most importantly, the role of land tenure in sharing that forest restoration result in positive social outcomes, that is in improving local livelihoods.
Yeah, so you're researching this mainly in Madagascar, or have also other areas of research in Africa?
We are mostly focusing on Madagascar, but in our analysis, we are also trying to make this a more, global problem by looking at the overlap between contested tenure, that is where there are overlapping claims to the lands, and areas, countries that have made ambitious commitments to restoration. So it's like starting with a global analysis, but then narrowing down to a single case country study of Madagascar.
Okay, I see. So that sounds like quite a multidisciplinary research, right? It involves both social science or interviews on the ground, but also other aspects. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, okay. That's correct. So I have a colleague who's doing the GI stuff. So he's looking at the special data sets and trying to look at this overlap between contested tenure and restoration commitments.
So you've traveled quite a lot. You've moved a lot. You've studied in different countries. How does your research career journey look like? So when and how did you decide to become a researcher?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that from a very early age, I've always had a very inquisitive mind. So I've always felt the need to do more and to explore more beyond the school curricula. So during my free time at high school, I used to, spend most of them reading books in the library. So that was back in the early 2000s. And, in countries such as Madagascar, we didn't really have access to internet. So I was mostly relying on any books I could put my hands on. And yeah, as I said, in poor countries such as Madagascar, you don't have many choices. So research kind of came naturally to me, but it became most obvious when I started my university years, where I studied agronomy and agricultural sciences at the university.
Did you have any particular role models that kind of directed you towards research or towards an academic career?
To be honest, not really. Like I used to, admire Albert Einstein and like many other researchers, but I didn't have like any particular role model, any specific role models.
Okay. How did you become interested in the environmental issues that you're researching right now about reforestation and things like that?
So this has always been something that's been, very close to my heart. So Madagascar is known globally for its unique biodiversity. So we always hear in the news that Madagascar has thousands of animal and plant species it cannot find anywhere else on Earth. But then its people are extremely poor, and Madagascar is what the World Bank classifies as, one of the least developed countries in the world. And that for me didn't sound right. So my first research project, so that was my bachelor thesis many years ago, was on estimating biomass and carbon content in soils. So this was when the concept of global payments for ecosystem services emerged in the world. So this is a concept where rich countries pay poorer countries to conserve their forests through the carbon that they store. So there I went. I traveled to the southern part of Madagascar. I collected lots of soil samples in the forest. I cut several trees and weighed them supposedly to develop more reliable estimates of the carbon that they can store. So this was my first entry to the research world. So that was where funding was available. I got also selected and I seized the opportunity. But I got very quickly bored with, doing laboratory analysis and, being isolated in my own lab world. So I knew from there that I needed to go back to my first motivation, which is trying to understand how we can reconcile biodiversity conservation with, the country's economic needs. So that's when I switched to social sciences and, trying to understand human decision making, which I felt would provide me with more answers.
And this switch has happened during your master degree or still while you were working on your bachelor thesis?
So that was during my master thesis. So that started in 2010 when I first came to Europe to pursue another MSc degree.
Right. You are actually an Erasmus Mundus alumna, right? I'm also, I did the Erasmus Mundus master degree. Did you do both a Erasmus Mundus master and a PhD degree? Or was that only one degree that was funded by Erasmus Mundus?
Both. Yeah, so I spent the first 2 years. So that was, I already had an MSc degree from Madagascar, but I decided to do another MSc degree through this high quality, high level study program that's financed by the European Union. And that was also because my English back then was so poor. So I could read and write some English, but I was very bad with speaking. Yeah, so I did both. It was called a double MSc degree in Sutrofor, which stands for Sustainable Tropical Forestry, and then I did a highly competitive joint PhD program called FONASO, or Forest for Nature and Society.
This was also part of the Erasmus Mundus degree?
Yeah.
How did you end up applying for it, or how did you discover the program?
So I came across it by chance, to be honest. So I think I found it on social media. And I was like, oh, this looks like the perfect opportunity to both improve my English and also like to do something that I've always really wanted to do, which is to do more social science and really explore the socioeconomic part of conservation, the social dimensions, the human dimensions.
For those that do not know, Erasmus Mundus usually use a consortium of universities for their courses. So you end up actually studying in several countries. And you studied in Bangor, and was it Denmark, or did you go to another country?
So during my master, it was Bangor in North Wales and Dresden in Eastern Germany. And then my PhD was with Bangor. I came back to Bangor and Copenhagen, University of Copenhagen in Denmark.
So you have a PhD and you also had a few postdocs by now. What do you think is the biggest challenge in a research career?
Yeah, so the biggest challenges in a research career, and especially in my case, in a developing country context, such as Madagascar, I would say are funding and infrastructure, which is related to funding. So I found it very frustrating at first when I decided to come back to Madagascar in late 2019. So there was basically no funding stream I could apply for from the government. It's not a priority. There is even no budget for doing research here. And back then, when I came back, I didn't even manage to get a small desk and a chair at the university. And this is the university I graduated from, where I spent like 5 years of my life, and where everyone knows me because I've always been the best graduating student in all my university years. So you can imagine how harder it can be for even another person. Yeah, so there is no funding, and there is also currently no prospect for me to becoming a permanent lecturer because the government is not recruiting. And there is a long list of people who graduated even like 10 years ago that would like to be hired as a permanent lecturer. So I've resorted to securing my own funding through the networks that I've built during my time in Europe. So I'm basically creating my own job and getting my own funding to be able to keep pursuing research.
Yeah, does that sound very challenging? So what keeps you going? What's the most rewarding thing about your research career, and what do you like the most about your work?
What keeps me going? I guess it's this quest for new knowledge and another little contribution I can make to like improving this knowledge, and also doing my part in the big problem that I'm really keen to address, which is to like how can Madagascar's unique and wonderful biodiversity can be used to also like benefit its economy. Yeah, so what we call the win-win, where both people and nature thrive. What I also found the most rewarding, especially since I came back to Madagascar, is so for the past 2 years, I'm working on a project that was specifically funded to create impact from the many years of research I've been doing on the social aspects of the human dimensions of conservation. And this includes the social impacts of conservation and the local impacts more specifically. Like if we've got to create a new protected area, what are the likely impacts on local people's livelihoods? How are local communities going to be affected? So this project I'm currently working on mostly primarily aims to support evidence-based policy. And we've been doing different activities that aim to create impacts. And this includes, for instance, like producing a video to communicate these research results in a novel way and in a much more personal and human level. And apart from the video, we've also been doing other engagement activities with various stakeholders like conservation practitioners and decision makers like government authorities, like a sharing workshop where we gathered several stakeholders working in conservation and where we shared with the research results and also facilitating sharing of best practices on how conservation practitioners and professionals and development professionals can develop and implement more effective development projects and social safeguard approaches within protected areas in Madagascar.
What is your favorite fieldwork location and why?
My favorite fieldwork location. So I would say it's a small village in the eastern rainforest of Madagascar. And this is because I've developed friendships, very strong relationships and friendships with the villagers. So it's not only about me doing research and interviewing these people, but mostly like sharing their language, sharing a lot of understanding and the lifestyle, and a lot of common perspectives on how much they really value forest conservation, but how conservation projects and initiatives sometimes create unintended impacts on their livelihoods. And how they are being negatively affected.
You mentioned a few times the biodiversity of Madagascar. Do you have a favorite species from Madagascar or otherwise from other places?
Favorite species? I think everyone loves lemurs, and my favorite one is the Indri. So it's the largest lemur species in Madagascar. And they make this really nice song. I cannot do it, unfortunately, but if you Google, I'm sure you'd can find one.
Okay. So coming back a bit more in depth to your research, if you'd have unlimited funding, let's say the funding situation would be much better, or you'd have unlimited funding, what do you think would be the project that you could undertake that would be the most impactful for the farmers with which you are working?
So I'm currently working on a couple of proposals where I am really hoping that would give me the funding to carry out this type of research. So something I would be really keen on doing next is looking at what would encourage small-scale farmers in rural areas of Madagascar to adopt more sustainable agricultural practices. So this is a huge problem because like one of the main drivers of deforestation in Madagascar is this practice of Sweden agriculture, which also sometimes known as slash and burn agriculture, or locally it's known as TAVI. I think one of the biggest reasons why deforestation is ongoing in Madagascar is because we haven't really so far managed to understand what are the enablers and also the barriers to the transition to more sustainable farming techniques. What would make farmers abandon this practice, this unsustainable practice of seasonal agriculture? So the key research questions that I would be really keen on addressing next is looking at the best policy levers that would encourage this transition to more sustainable agriculture. So I'm mostly interested in two policies. So first one is land tenure, that is people's perceptions of what rights they have with regard to their lands, and also financial incentives, like how much would be needed to encourage them to make the switch. I'm hoping to do a small randomized control trial where we can look at which of these two policies would be most effective at encouraging the agricultural transition, or it could also be that both policies are needed. So this would be my next dream project.
You suspect that those are the two biggest barriers towards adoption of more sustainable agriculture in Madagascar? So tenure, rights, and just better funding, right?
Yeah, so these are not suspicions. I don't know if that word exists. So these are informed by like my decade of experiences working on these issues, and decade of many years of spending time in the rural villages and talking to like these very small scale farmers, and also of course the literature.
So I know you were at COP26, the climate change conference in Glasgow this year, especially from the perspective of someone coming from Madagascar, which is already experiencing serious climate change effects. What did you make of the conference and the outcomes?
Yeah, so that was my first COP. So it was a very steep learning curve. And I was there as part of the Malagasy official party delegate, but I was given a specific role, so as a researcher. So I was told to be an observer mostly, and I wasn't really taking part in the negotiations. So my main roles were to advise the government, and also like take part in the what they call side events, which are happening in parallel to the negotiations. And at COP26, I've been invited to take part in a few in some of these side events. One that was that particularly was interesting was one organized by Kew Royal Botanics Garden on what makes good nature-based solutions. So nature-based solution has recently gained global traction, and it has been labeled as a fundamental solution to tackling climate change. And nature-based solutions are not new. They can include forest restoration or conservation or forest management. I wanted to be very critical. I was also wearing my critical social scientist hat. I was asked also to comment on the Glasgow Pledge, like several countries committing to ending deforestation by 2030. And my intervention, my talk was mostly focused on, okay, these are good news. So this renewed commitment to ending deforestation is good news, but I think everything comes down eventually to how the money is going to be used. If it's going to be used on bureaucracy or paying international consultants, then it's not going to achieve much, and nothing is going to change. I think things are going to get worse and worse. But if the money is being invested in the things that really matter, such as recognizing and strengthening people's rights to their lands and to other benefits, such as carbon revenue, and also like improving people's livelihoods, then that's where there is hope that it can make a difference.
Are you hopeful that this funding is coming, or this type of funding will happen to just address the points that you mentioned? Are you optimistic, basically?
I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. So the fact that the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, that the rules have been agreed, is certainly good news, and that gives us hope that it will unlock the funding that is very much needed to make this Glasgow Pledge happen. But then, we can only have hope. We have to stay optimistic. So it's a bit like these are also like global interest. There is global interest in conserving Madagascar's forests because like our forests, they store carbon and also like this precious, unique biodiversity that I've been talking about. So it's as simple as, okay, if you want to conserve that biodiversity, and if you want tropical forests to contribute to tackling climate change, then you've got to pay the costs. And channel the funding that's needed to make conservation happen in countries such as Madagascar, and also restoration, of course.
You're also doing some consultancy. Is that the same as your research, or is it more applied?
No, it's still like very much research-based. And this is based in Ethiopia, where we are looking at the importance of like how herders, pastoralists, how they respond to environmental changes, such as climate change or drought, using experimental games.
So what are these experimental games? Do you want to talk a bit about those?
Yeah, so that was, I started using this approach during my very first postdoc at the University of Stirling. Games are a very fun way and also a very engaging tool to understand people's decision making. So I developed them with the help of a colleague from New York. So he's not based at Boston, Andrew Bell. So he was the game developer, but we were like working together, developing the game concept using the platform called NetLogo. So the aim was really to use games as a novel approach to understanding conflicts, conservation conflicts, which are conflicts happening between biodiversity conservation and food security in several countries across the world. So we worked in Scotland, Gabon, Kenya, Madagascar, Tanzania.
So each farmer is a participant, and they play against each other or with each other?
I would say more with each other. So the game was played in a group setting, in a group of 4 farmers, and they were asked to make decisions on a digital farming landscape. So we used tablets. But the game was very visual, so they didn't need to know how to read or write to be able to play it. And we were mostly looking at how they cooperate and how they make decisions collectively, because the game was interactive. So the decisions that one player make affect the outcomes that the other players get. So it was looking at like coordination and cooperation between farmers, and how this collective action actually impacts the conservation outcomes or the food security outcomes.
What were the most interesting conclusions for you from this project?
I think some of the most important findings are that financial incentives matter in encouraging farmers to support conservation interests, but there are other social like underpinning underlying social factors that equally play a big role, such as what we call social equity. So that's their ability to make their voices heard. So like playing a role in the decision-making processes, deciding what's best for them. Yes, so money is important, but so is the consideration of their specific needs and whether they have sufficient ability to make their voices heard. So equity was defined as having three main dimensions. So there is this issue of recognition and also decision-making processes. So this is their ability to participate equitably in the decision-making processes. And then there is this distributional equity, which has to do with how costs and benefits are being distributed across community members and also between different like conservation and development goals.
You're one of the recipients of the Top 100 Young Conservation Leaders Award offered by African Wildlife Foundation and WWF, among other organizations. How do you see this role as a conservation leader? What do you think? What do you think should be the priorities of African conservation leaders of any age? Actually, what should they focus on?
If I were to talk on behalf of all young conservation leaders, I would say that our main responsibility is to ensure that there is something left for the future generation to inherit. Because these are common heritage. So I have the word in Malagasy, but not in English. Sorry. In Malagasy, it's called suyumbunana. But so I was selected as this part of this top 100 African leaders, mostly because of my contribution to my role in supporting evidence-based policy. So this is mostly from my last 2 years of work in Madagascar, where I've been actively trying to share research results with policymakers and to influence policy making so that they better consider research results in their decision-making processes. And you asked what you think are the priorities that African conservation leaders should be focusing on. So I would say learn from the past and learn from our failures. So at COP26, I used the example of the airline industry. So in the airline industry, when they have even the most minor failure of safety procedures, they look very closely at what went wrong. And this is to avoid bigger disasters in the future. And in conservation, I feel that we don't look closely or we don't look at all at our failures. I'd like to see more recognition of past failures and also like learning our lessons. That is better recognition of the trade-offs that are inherent in nature-based solutions such as forest conservation to give more hope for future success. So this is basically the need to reconcile biodiversity conservation with local livelihoods. We cannot just do conservation. We have not to also specifically address people's livelihood needs. By learning from the past, so this is coming from years of reflections and also interactions with conservation professionals in African countries and especially in Madagascar. So I've noticed that conservation practitioners, they often sometimes tend to assume that conservation and reforestation are always good, that they always result in positive outcomes on people's livelihoods. And even if it's not immediate, in the longer term or medium term, they're going to bring lots of like several benefits to local livelihoods. But they are not very willing to recognize that there can be a local cost to conservation, and this cost can be huge, and they can affect many generations. They can be felt by local people over the long term. So I'd like to see more recognition of these trade-offs that are inherent in forest conservation to give more hope for future success.
So moving back to this balance between work and personal life, research is such a demanding career. There's so many challenges. How do you deal with finding a work-life balance?
Yeah, I'm not sure I found the correct work-life balance, to be honest. I'm still struggling. It's an everyday struggle. So I have a young son. He's 4 years and a half now, and I had him when I was doing the first postdoc. So that was in the first year of postdoc. I'm so grateful to my then manager, who still kindly agreed to take me in his lab, although he knew that I was expecting a baby. So that was so hard and so frustrating because I'm working alongside a team of, I think there were 4 postdocs in the team, and they were both married. They have partners, but they don't have kids. This is something I'm still struggling with, but I think I've been very lucky to have a very supportive husband. So we are both working in the environmental field. He's also working for a conservation NGO, but more as a practitioner. But he knows the demands of research. He knows the demands of like late night hours, especially when you are working towards a deadline or when you've got to revise a paper. So I think that has helped me a lot, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without him.
Is there something in particular that you like to do to switch off work and just kind of switch to a non-work status?
Dancing. I love dancing.
Oh.
So I usually joined this fitness club. So we it's fitness, but it's also a lot of fun at the same time. So we do lots of Zumba and also do lots of ballroom dancing. So that's something I've always enjoyed, like since I was in my first year at university.
Very nice.
Yes, it's good for the spirit and for the body as well.
Indeed. So one last question. If you think back, what is the best bit of advice that you've received regarding your research career, and that you think, young people considering research should know?
Yeah, the best bit of advice I think I received, and something that stuck with me, like from the very early stages of my research career, is that research is iterative, and it gets better as you get more experienced. So as an early career researcher and also a Malagasy researcher trying to get published in my third language, English is my third language, I got very quickly discouraged by this writing, this publication process is never to see an end. But then what that person is he was a lecturer at Bangor University back then, but he's moved since then, that the research is iterative. I think it has helped me a lot to become more patient and also more passionate in the research process.
Thank you very much, Sarobidy. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.